Hello, everybody, and welcome to the G4A show. This is episode 102. I can't believe we've made it this far. And I am joined by a different co host this week because, of course, if you don't know, we have some new co hosts that are going to be rotating in and out every month from now on because Luke and Sean are off doing other things. Luke, obviously, doing his playthroughs on the channel, so subscribe for those. And Sean is just kind of enjoying married life these days. But I am joined by the analog stick gamer himself from analogstickgaming.com, our friend Jeff. How are you, Jeff?
I am doing quite well. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me as always.
Well, you of course are going to be here probably every other week now, as long as our scheduling allows. So how does it feel to be a new co-host of the G4A show?
Oh, it's always good. I love being on the show. I love having pretty much just discussions about video games. I mean, that's literally why I started my site. So, and like the podcast stuff is fun, right? It is,
Sure.
again, it's just people essentially having a chat about video games and all that kind of stuff. And I live for that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, because we've got an interesting topic today. We're going to talk to you about what we deem as some underappreciated developers, because of course there are lots of big developers out there that everybody knows and loves. Your likes of Rockstar, etc. Bethesda is probably another one that people really love, but there are some developers that do great games and maybe don't get the recognition that they deserve for those games. So we're going to talk about some of those today. But before we do that, one, Jeff, why don't you explain to people a little bit more about who you are and what you do over at analogstickgaming.com? And then the second thing will be, what have you been playing recently?
sure. Yeah. So my name is Jeff Young. I am Canadian. And I have been, I've played video games for literally my entire life. And a couple years ago, I started Analog Stick Gaming. And it was just kind of like my little slice on the internet to essentially talk about video games and share that stuff. I had done some freelance work, had before that, but just kind of wanted to kind of have a little bit of more control on what I was putting out, how I was putting it out, and essentially the context and stuff that I was making to kind of grow my voice in the industry. Like again, I am not a massive outlet. I basically run everything just by myself. But since 2017, I've produced hundreds of reviews of a collection of stuff that I've just paid for and stuff that I've worked my way up to getting codes from some pretty big names to smaller names as well too. Kind of grow with that.
And
But
you are a reviewing machine. Like, the amount of reviews you put out is ridiculous, to be honest. I did a review the other day because, as you know, I've now gone into reviews and I'm just kind of learning that process and
yeah,
what the best things are to do. And I think I've done about 4 or 5 reviews at this point over this entire year, and you do that in like a couple of weeks.
yeah.
It's
I
astronomical what
I
you're
would
able to do.
I would say on average I put out about 4 or 5 reviews a month. I think my record's 12.
Wow.
Um, that was last June, but also COVID hit. I didn't have a lot of hours.
True.
But yeah, like I work a full-time job as well too, for 40 hours a week and whatnot.
Hmm.
And yeah, I put out about 4 or 5 reviews a month, but I also overread my reviews considerably.
So you
Um,
actually spend quite a lot of time on them.
More so than I would like. I'm the type of person where I'll read 6 paragraphs and then I'll change one little thing and I'm like,
Now you
start
have
over
to
again.
change
And then I'll read
everything
it again.
else. Yeah.
Like I'll read my reviews literally like 40 times and I'll just keep adding stuff. Like I'm a
see,
rambler.
see, I'm
Like
kind
I
of
will
the
start at topic A and end somewhere else entirely, and
yeah.
that's how I write as
We
well,
should we
unfortunately.
should that would be a good topic for a future show. Actually, we should talk about the review process and kind of what goes into it, because I think a lot of people are interested, but they don't necessarily realize how difficult it can be sometimes. because getting that balance between giving enough information without going too in depth and making people bored is something that's really hard. And it's something that I've been struggling with, because I find that I almost go too far the opposite direction, where because I'm afraid of writing too much, I then end up writing not quite enough, and I miss certain things that I would like to say.
Yeah,
That is like,
my reviews are way too long, and like I would love to edit them, but and sometimes I do.
yeah,
Sometimes like I'll
for
I'll
sure.
I'll do a review and I'll just scrap it and kind of go from there. But I don't
So,
know, like in
so speaking of reviews, you obviously play a lot of games, and I don't know what you've been playing recently, but have you been playing anything that you can tell us about?
yeah, I'm not under embargo for anything right now. I'm still waiting for like a few codes and stuff. And again, like I don't get everything I shoot for. So I end up buying a fair bit, and based off kind of like my budget and whatnot, Game Pass has been a blessing. My God,
For sure.
that has fueled a
Yeah,
lot
when you
of
want to
my
review
site.
something, when you want to review something and you find out it's a Game Pass day one game, that just makes it so much easier, right? Because if you can't get that code, you
Yeah,
know that you're able to access the game without having to put your own money in.
and especially
Uh,
with like inflation too, because like I'm
mhm.
seeing like some of these games coming out at like $90 Canadian.
Yeah. Mhm.
So like when God of War comes out, the base PS5 version is going to be like $90.
It's crazy
Um,
to me.
like it is stupid. Like I picked up like the Quarry for Series X, and
Mhm.
that has that PlayStation pricing of $90.
Wow.
And I can say right now, that was not worth $90. I
No.
don't care how many times I replay it, it's not worth $90. And
No.
then like Nintendo puts out their stuff and it's $79.99. It's the normal Canadian $80.
Yeah.
But in regards to what I'm playing right now,
Mhm.
what do we got here? Fire Emblem Warriors Three Hopes.
Nice.
I'm
Nice.
currently playing that, and like when I reviewed Fire Emblem Warriors, the first one, I think I gave it like a 6.5. It was very repetitive. The story was not great. The characters were instantly forgettable, and it didn't really feel satisfying. Um, this one here is dramatically better. It still has that repetition. It is going from base to base to base, and I wish there was a bit more variety in what you're doing. Age of Calamity did a fantastic job at breaking up a lot of that with
Yeah.
a
Yeah, of
lot of
course.
variety. But no, like if you like Three Houses and you want to spend more time with those characters, Three Hopes does a fantastic job at doing that. It also gives you, again, it is a Dynasty Warriors type Muso. So I mean, like you can play with the auto battle and just play the relationship and customization and leveling up systems and stuff. The class stuff is fantastic. Like it literally has every system from Three Houses. It
Nice.
just has a different a different path of gameplay, but it
Yeah. Yeah.
is super fun. It looks gorgeous, except for its backgrounds. Like all the characters and stuff look fantastic.
Great.
Um, but yeah, its backgrounds are pretty bland. It recycles way too many objectives. Um, but it is super fun. Like it's not going to be the Muso game that changes you. I think Persona Strikers and Age of Calamity are the games that if you don't like Musos but you like their property, this will draw you in. But Three Hopes is good, but it's not like the
Okay,
the
that's
end
good
all
to
be
know.
all for Musos.
That's good to know. What else have
I
you
think
been
what else
playing
I'm playing.
recently? Anything else?
What was there? I know there was something on here. Hold on, I'm gonna turn.
Jeff plays so many things he can't keep track.
Just gonna turn. Damn it. There we go.
Yeah, yeah. What have you got?
Yeah, like so. What else am I playing? Oh yeah, I've been playing the Outriders, the expansion pack
Nice,
that they
nice.
that they brought out, the DLC stuff, and it was a game that I had on Game Pass. So obviously, if you own a game on Game Pass, it's probably not the greatest idea to buy DLC for a game you simply have on Game Pass,
Yeah,
because
because you
then
don't
once that
own the
game
game, and
leaves
once
Game
the game isn't
Pass,
on
you're
Game
screwed.
Pass.
So
I will say
they
though,
had a
just while you're on that, Um, I have done that a few times where I'll buy the DLC, and then if the game is leaving Game Pass, because they obviously normally give you a little
Yeah.
window to know, I will then buy the game later if I plan to continue playing it. Because so one of the examples is World War Z.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't own that game. First of all, it was on Game Pass. Played loads of it. Bought the DLC, and then it left Game Pass, and I think they still had like a discount on it because they allow you to buy these games at a discount. And I was like, oh, do you know what? I'm still playing it, and I enjoyed the DLC, and I know they're doing more DLC, so I'll buy the game. Um, so I just wanted to put that out there for people that it is something you can do, but just be aware that if the game is leaving Game Pass, you will then have to buy the game to continue accessing your DLC, unless it's some sort of standalone product where you don't need the main game to play it.
Yeah, like World Slayer had a bundle that I think put Outriders at like, I think it was like $20 or something after
Nice.
the DLC price. The DLC price on its own, I think was like 40 $40 or something like that.
Yeah, because
Um,
I think it was like 35 British pounds. So 40 to 50 bucks Canadian sounds right to me. Um, which
yeah, it
isn't
was 48.14 for
nice.
just the and that's on sale. It was normally 53.49.
Okay.
And like I got the whole pack for I think $58 after I used my Xbox rewards for like
That's
$10.
nice. That's nice.
But the price of the expansion itself is definitely too high
For
for
what's
what's
there, right?
here.
You were telling me that it's quite short.
Yeah, so the content that is available in this thing is a wealth of things that can consume your time if that is what you're looking for, because that's what like live service games kind of do, is they're built upon repetition. And even though Outriders isn't technically a live service, it
They
is
have
that
those
in
elements,
everything
right?
but name.
Yeah, they have those elements.
So yeah, the campaign itself is about 3 hours, and I think the story and stuff is relatively okay. This could have been something that easily could have been 8 to 10 hours. There's no side quests, so there's no anything to do apart from just the laser focus it has on telling its story. And there is some urgency to it, so I get it. But I think that there could have been just like more bounties added. There could have been like just some side quests. There could have been areas off the beaten path to kind of explore. It doesn't do any of that, and that's both good and that's both bad, because when it focuses on its story, which it does, it's great. I think the story is solid. It has a very limited use of its characters. Um, some characters literally just have two or three voice lines, and that's literally it. The villain itself, I don't even know how to pronounce her name. It is bizarre. Um, she is a very captivating villain right from the get go, but they don't do anything with her to make her interesting. The fight with her is pretty fun. It's a lot of AoE attacks and stuff. But overall, like, she is a better villain than that series has had, but they didn't do anything to make her feel like that. But everything else that's there is great. The end game stuff is pretty fun. I do wish it was procedural so that the experience was different every time. There is some variation to like the enemies you're fighting, but it's basically this gauntlet of like 10 rooms that leads to a last fight and then gives you like a an ending that essentially kind of teases more. So they're obviously not done with it unless Square Enix is done with it. I mean, they've shown that anything apart from their main core studios, they're willing to sell off. So
Yeah, that was
I don't
odd one.
know the future of Outriders because again, like I don't think it was that profitable for them.
No, no, I think
But
I think that Game Pass obviously allowed it to get an audience that it wouldn't have had otherwise. Um, but I really enjoyed the game. Like, I don't know about other people, and I think it's one of those interesting games where I think people who played it and really kind of gave it some time did enjoy what was there. It just felt very, it felt like a game that could have come out 10 years before it came out. Do you know what I mean?
The the technical problems were also really bad. I mean, people could
At
barely
launch,
play it
yeah.
when it came
Yeah.
out. People's inventories were getting like deleted. Um,
Yeah.
it, I think it suffered a lot from that end of it. And,
But in
you
terms
know,
of the actual core gameplay
yeah,
and the gameplay loop, I really enjoyed it. We played quite a lot of it together. And I did
and
really
it's
enjoy
better
the
now.
game. Yeah,
It's better
absolutely.
now. Like they added a third tier of loot in regards to where your previous loot had like two perks. Now it's got three. So creating your build is a lot more enjoyable in regards to kind of overkill on some aspects of it. The They added a secondary skill tree to further
Hmm.
create a second sub class within your class, and they also added like the same kind of system Diablo 3 had. I can't remember what it's called. I keep wanting to say Paragon, but that sounds Mass Effect to me.
I'm not
Where
sure. I'm not sure.
it's like you have like these like 10 things or something, and you make incremental small percentage improvements on that stuff.
Oh, okay.
And so I mean that stuff is good, but like what they've done here is they've made the game extremely more fun to play. The build potential for this game is utterly fantastic. There's just not a lot to do. The
Yeah,
main
the actual
campaign is
content,
good.
there isn't enough there, right?
Like that end game content and like some of the new stuff that they've added definitely makes the game more enjoyable. But I think if that last end game activity was procedurally generated
Hmm.
so that the experience was drastically different every single time, I
It would
think
make it
that
more
would be,
replayable, right?
yeah, because then you don't feel like you're like, okay, let's take a left because we know it's going to be this way and whatnot. And the rooms are all picked out where if you go this way, it's always like a helmet you'll get, or this way is always boots or
So you can
armor.
literally figure out exactly what you're going to
Yeah,
do. Which, do you know what though? In a weird way, I actually like that because it that adds that element of, okay, we're going to go and do this and we know exactly what we're aiming for. You know, it's that's what I liked about like Division 2 when they
mm-hmm,
eventually started to add more and more gear to it, but they would show you what each mission would reward you in terms of, if you did this mission you'd get a backpack, if you did this mission you'd get a mask, whatever it
mm-hmm.
might be. And I like having that, knowing what the reward is at the end of the tunnel. I think it makes it, that's what makes it less of a live service game for me, because when I think about live service games, I think about randomized loot, right? And randomized loot is fun because, yeah, okay, that adds some replayability to it because you don't know what you're going to get, so you keep doing it in order to get the things that you want. But being able to have that direction and kind of
Yeah,
knowing
like
exactly what you're going to get isn't a bad thing, I don't think.
the
But
helmet's
like
still
you,
random though. Like it's
yeah,
not a set particular one.
no, of course,
But yeah,
but you know it's going to be a helmet. Does that make sense? And
yeah,
that's what I like about that element. I do, obviously I haven't played it yet, but based on what you're saying, it does sound like even within that though, it could, there could be still an element of procedural kind of randomness to it where maybe you're doing different rooms or do you know what I mean? Maybe.
yeah. There's different paths you can take. The enemies, as far as I know, are largely random, but the biggest offender, before we move on from this part, is the end game activity is the only thing in the game that is not scaled to how
Oh,
many players are playing.
oh
So
God.
it is designed around 3 players. So if you're playing Outriders all by yourself, this is the only bit of content that is not scaled to 1 player.
Oh wow.
And the enemies progressively get harder as you continue to play through it. They get 1 times, 2 times, 3 times harder, or whatever the case is. So playing it by yourself is
Near
disastrous.
impossible. Yeah.
It is absolutely disastrous. Like I went through the entire game and like I could lower the difficulty if I needed to or raise it up or whatever the case was, but this is just it is super fun if you're playing with a group of people that are actually communicating. Like I joined probably about 7 games and every single one of them joined either at a door while we were waiting for another person and we just sat there, or I actually ended up joining one game right at the last door and the guy walks ahead and the ending plays.
Oh
I
wow.
hadn't even experienced the entire content there, but I saw the ending. I saw the ending. And
Brilliant.
then there was one time where we fought the last boss with another group, and we died when he had like half a pixel of health left.
Oh wow.
Um,
Mhm.
so in spirit, I beat it. Um, but like it is a fantastic expansion. I just wish it was about half the price.
Well, I will pick up that expansion at some point because, as I said, I enjoyed Outriders. So when I pick it up, maybe we can run through it together and yeah, figure out what is all there. But I want to talk before we move on to the main topic a bit about what I've been playing because if you follow me on social media, you will have seen that I wrote a review this week for Matchpoint Tennis Championships, which is a day one Game Pass game. And I enjoyed it. It's this game definitely has problems. Please go and read my full review at theouterhaven.net. But it has issues, but it feels like a really solid foundation when it comes to the gameplay on the court. I'm a huge Topspin 4 fan. I think
Mm-hmm.
Topspin 4 was probably the best tennis game ever made at the time and hasn't really been uh it hasn't been unseated from that seat since then. We've had a couple of contenders, things like World Tour and AO Tennis, and it's like this game, what Match Point Tennis Championships does so well is the core on court gameplay experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's so smooth and it's so easy to pick up and play, but hard to become a master of. And I love that. I love playing this game, but then it's let down by the fact that there are no there's a limited roster of, I think it's 16 real world tennis players, only 5 females and 11 males. So that's, a little bit weird there.
Can you make
Um,
your own character?
you can make your own character, and
Okay.
there is a career mode where you're basically trying to work your way up through the rankings through doing different tournaments, etc. And you do actually have training that you can engage in, um, which obviously helps you to improve your stats.
Mm-hmm.
And this training is almost like mini games where you're trying to hit certain targets on the court, doing certain things. And what's quite clever about it, this system I enjoyed, is as you rank up, you unlock access to different coaches, and these different coaches will actually help you improve different stats. So you have to use different coaches during your training sessions to
Okay.
improve your different stats. And I really enjoyed that. I think it's a clever system, um, because it adds an element of progression that wouldn't otherwise be there, right? Because you're trying to progress up through the rankings, and you also have some difficult decisions to make because sometimes you can choose between kind of doing a tournament or doing extra training to improve your stats. And of course, if you do a tournament, you're going to go up through the rankings, but you've missed an opportunity to improve your stats because your stats only improve through training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you have to make a couple of difficult decisions because if you don't play in a tournament, your ranking can actually go down. Your ranking will go down over time. So there's
Hmm.
quite an interesting kind of progression system there. The only thing that makes the career kind of really bare bones, it comes back to the other problems with the game. There's a limited roster. There's a lack of licensing for the real world tournaments. Like I'm watching Wimbledon right now, and and there's a lack of licensing for any of the major tournaments, which just kind of leads to this feeling of this is not authentic, even though it's great to play. And it's obviously trying to be an authentic tennis game because they have real world players, etc. They just
Yeah.
don't, they they clearly can't go quite far enough on whatever budget they had available to
Yeah.
them.
I was gonna say if it's a budget thing of like purchasing the rights for it, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of those companies, like, they're probably starving for money. They're trying to rebuild,
Absolutely. And
something, so they're going
you know,
outrageous, like just
this
like FIFA, right?
yeah, absolutely. So this game was made by Taurus Games, which is an Australian studio, and they nailed the gameplay. And that's why I would say that any tennis game fan or any tennis fan, you know, kind of who is looking for a tennis game, this is the best one that you can play right now because Topspin 4 isn't available on current gen consoles. It never
Yeah.
released on PC. So in the last decade, on a gameplay front, this is by far the best tennis game there's ever been. It isn't even in the same league as the other tennis games in terms of gameplay. It's just so bare bones in terms of everything else around it that it stops it from being a great game. This is a good tennis game that should be a great tennis game. And part of that comes back to the career as well, being very, you know, menu heavy when some of
Hmm.
these things could happen in cutscenes and that kind of stuff. Like, add a little bit of character to it. Do you know what I mean? Add a little bit of something to it rather than just being menus. I have no problem with menus, but when you've been doing it for 5-10 hours, it
Hmm.
becomes less engaging because you're just clicking your way through menus trying to get to the next thing. Um, and then the other thing I would say is, again, it goes back to like you have all these license things and all that sort of stuff. And it's just like, okay, you're limited. You're limited in terms of what you can do with licenses. I understand that. But if that's the case, then improve your creation tools, because the creation tools are quite limited. And actually, if you had some better creation tools here, and almost like a community creations where people could upload their creations and you could then download them, you could you could have a situation where people make the other tennis players who are not in the game.
Just
And
like
that,
the new WWE, where
yeah,
they have like a vast assortment of that kind of stuff.
yeah, precisely. So it's one of those things where this foundation of a tennis game is really, really strong. There is one thing that they really, which I think is a major miss, even outside, because I'm prepared to somewhat forgive the licensing issue because yes, okay, it takes away from the authenticity of the game in terms of being a simulation, but it doesn't actually affect the quality of the game. Does that make sense? Um, but one thing that does affect the quality of the game is the complete lack of doubles play. So you can only play in singles matches one on one. There are no doubles
Wow.
whatsoever. Yeah.
That is outrageous, especially because like you take a look at sports games like that, they're generally like kind of co-op group
Almost like
experiences and stuff.
almost like party style games, right? Get
Like, can
get
you
together
imagine
with
if
a group
Mario
of friends.
Strikers was just single player?
I
Like
know.
that franchise wouldn't have caught on. Even like DOA beach
Yeah.
volleyball, if that had
So
just been
so
one
so
on one,
so you
no
can
one would even
play.
talk about it.
So you can play one on one, and there is obviously online with ranked and casual. You can invite a friend, but as from everything I've seen and played, and it's about 10 hours of the game in total, there is only one on one available in this game. There are no doubles. I don't know if they're going to add them later. I don't know if it was a technical issue, but that to me is the biggest miss from the game because it's like, okay, you've got female competitors, you've got male competitors, but you can't do doubles, you can't do mixed doubles. You literally are stuck to one on one games. Admittedly, they do allow you to do female against male if you so choose, which is a nice little touch. But why I don't understand. When I was playing it, I was like, but you've got all the gameplay pillars here. The gameplay would function exactly the same for the
Mm-hmm.
most part. Like, obviously, you'd have to work on AI and stuff like that, but for the most part, the gameplay would be the same. So, how much
Yeah.
extra work really is it to enable doubles in this game? I'm not sure because I've never made a tennis game. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it feels like a massive miss. And that's what made me, at the Outer Haven, we rate out of 5, and I gave this game a 3.5 out of 5 because the way I see it is it's a good game. It is a good game that is worth your time just for the on-court gameplay experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure how much time you're going to get out of it because it's limited in the fact of no doubles, being a very menu heavy based career mode, even though it's got some fun ideas in there in terms of
Yeah.
how the progression works. Um, you may play it online with a friend and things like that. It's definitely worth playing. Like I said, it's a day one Game Pass game. So if you've got Game Pass,
Yeah.
it's worth trying out. Um, but yeah, it's more. I kind of came out of the game and it's more like, oh, okay, I'm going to keep an eye on this one for future installments because if they can build on this strong gameplay foundation and kind of allow themselves a bit more budget for more licenses or adding things like doubles and mixed doubles to the game, I think they've got a really promising future with this franchise.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think like
yeah.
when you come down to like the licenses, whether it's like tournaments, locations, or whether or not it is actual tennis players, I wonder if they take a look at, okay, what is the investment cost of bringing another 2 or 3 players, and is it going to be worth it financially to bring in those players for the small amount of people that are be like, oh, you know what, this person's in it, I'm going to buy it.
So
I
so
wonder that
so
conversion
I'll
rate.
give you. I absolutely agree with that. The reason I personally think it's worth the money is I'll give you an example from my experience. I played getting on for 10 hours of the career mode. Okay. Around 10 hours. And during that time, I got to the top 50 ranking and I won a couple of major tournaments or what would be classified as the real world majors. And I didn't play a licensed player once because there are only 16 licensed players in the game. And obviously, being a male, and I don't know if you can do a female career mode, I would have to go back and check that. But being a male player, there were only 11 licensed players that I could come up against. And I didn't play any of them during my 10-hour time. And it's like, that's a problem because at that point I'm going through this career mode and it just doesn't feel authentic at all because
Yeah.
I'm playing these randomized players, that don't really mean anything. And it's like, but if I
Wait,
was coming,
is there no licensed actual tennis players at all?
so there are
Like, yeah,
there
like
are
Serena
licensed,
Williams and all that stuff?
yeah. So they've got a couple of legends. So people like Tim Henman is in there, and who have they got in there? Um, another, so one of the
I only know that
British,
guy that was controversial all those years ago.
yeah, Nick Kyrgios they have, who's the Australian tennis player. Obviously, being an Australian studio, he is
Yeah.
one of the higher rated players in the game. Um, and they have a few other people. So they do, like I said, they have 16 licensed players altogether. Five
Mm-hmm.
of those are female, 11 males.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is when you're limited to that number of people, you don't, like I said, I played 10 hours of career and I didn't play any of these licensed players. I saw
Yeah.
them there in the rankings. Do you know what I mean? I could see them in the rankings, but I was never playing them because I just wasn't coming up against them. Either they were losing their matches or whatever. Like a few times I didn't even see them in the tournaments. And it's just like,
Oh,
okay,
okay. I get what you mean.
this is a weird situation here. And it's like, that's something that could be fixed by either you have more licensed players, as I was saying earlier, but that costs a lot of money, right? Or you get as I mentioned earlier, better creation tools and allow the community to fill out the game with these created versions of real world players.
Now,
Because
do
why
these
not?
real world players, do they provide their own motion capture to get their authentic moves?
So I'm not sure because I only so I had it so I ended up having to rush this review a little bit. So I only played with real world players a couple of times. Um and they all felt fairly similar to me,
Okay.
which would suggest that no, they are not motion capturing these people.
Maybe that Australian tennis player was the motion capture for like the male or something.
Yeah, possibly. Because obviously there is a difference between male and female.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there's a
But I'm
difference
saying
there.
like if like a player has like a signature like right
Way
hand
of doing
strike
something.
or like a
Yeah.
certain way that they
Uh,
move around the court.
so that could be there, but in my limited time using those licensed players, I definitely didn't notice it. So
Okay.
if it is there, it's not very noticeable. Um, but it's weird because again, all of these bad things I'm saying about the game, right? And I still enjoyed playing the game. Like that's the thing I want to get across is this game is a limited success is the way I'd describe it. It's a limited game, but it is a success in the sense that where it really matters, it's one of the better games for tennis that we've ever had, which is on the court. It feels smooth to play, it's easy to pick up, but hard to master. I
Mm-hmm.
can imagine having tons of fun playing friends online in this game. Do you know what I mean? And kind of having that element of competition between us of like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, you know, because it's like that will push the skill ceiling even higher in terms of what you can do. And yeah, I just think they nailed that gameplay. And when you nail the gameplay of a game, shortcomings in other areas don't really matter as much, right?
Yeah.
Because as long as the game is fun to play and it executes what it's trying to execute really well, then that's all that really counts.
Yeah, like I part of me agrees with that, and then the other part of me takes a look at something like Mario Strikers Battle League that just came out. Plays super fun. There is nothing to do in that game other than basic matches.
Okay.
Like it's a game that I'm like, this is so much fun to play, but there's nothing here. Like you get the customization stuff for all of your armor pieces and whatnot, which kind of dictates what your characters look like. But like you can't even name your team. You pick preset stuff. So there's a very lack of customization there that I think could have been fleshed out to pick like preset stuff and have a team and create your own jerseys and all that kind of stuff. Like I think that could have been fun. I mean, there's not even like
So
um
it's a very
really
limited game that is fun to
yeah,
play.
like
Yeah,
even like when
I
Kind of
get that.
Funny was playing it, they're like, hey, why can't we have four players on the exact same team when
to
playing
to
online?
be fair, I will say because I understand that when a game is that limited, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
Match Point Tennis Championships isn't quite that limited. It just is more limited than it should be
yeah.
for a tennis game. Something like and we want to move on here, but even something like just the addition of doubles to the game would
That would be
add
huge.
so much more playability, you know, and that would be like, oh, I'm in Korea. Can I join a doubles tournament instead of doing this one singles? Or can I play doubles online with three other friends? You know, it's like that kind of stuff would add a lot more to do to the game. And that's one thing. So imagine if they had done two of these things that I'd been complaining about. And that's why I say that the foundation here is so strong and there is something worth playing here, because the career mode, like I said, it is menu based. So go in kind of understanding that outside of gameplay in tournaments and your training, everything is menu based. There are no cutscenes, anything like that. It's you unlock these different rackets that affect your stats, but that is all just
Hmm.
done in a menu. You don't go to a shop or something. Do you know what I mean? You don't. all that sort of stuff. You're not earning currency to unlock other
Yeah.
things. It's all menu based stuff.
Hmm.
But the thing about it is the progression in the career is good, although limited, obviously, because you only get so many training sessions that you can kind of do as they pop up on the calendar. And sometimes you have to pick those instead of tournaments, all that kind of thing. But even their core idea around how progression works is a good
Hmm.
one. And add that to almost exceptional, what I would consider exceptional gameplay for a tennis game, and they have something that is definitely worth your time. It's just I don't know how much time you're going to get out of it, because you might play this career mode for 5 hours and be like, okay, I've had enough now. Like, I've enjoyed my time, but I don't need to play more of it because I've now kind of seen everything that I can do in the game. And that's the problem, is there's not enough variation in terms of options for the player.
Hmm.
Um, and that's where they're kind of held back from being a great game. Like, if I was to score this game out of 10, I probably would have given it a 7.5. It's that kind of game. It's a good to very good game
Yeah.
because of how it nails the gameplay experience. But it would have been, without question, even if you just add doubles, that would have pushed the rating up for me.
Well, maybe
And
the
that
doubles is the D in DLC. You know.
so but it's one of those things that Taurus Games is now a studio that I will watch in the future, and I'm excited to see what they do with Matchpoint Tennis, because it's, like I said, it's the strongest foundation we've had in a long time for a tennis game. So good luck to them in their future, and I hope that people do try out this game, because, like I said, it's on Game Pass.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
definitely give it a try.
some of its development might have been cut to essentially get it out. I know like a lot of
For
like
sure.
teams and stuff have been, struggling throughout
For
the
sure.
last 2 years. So it could very well be something coming out later on.
So let's now move on to our main topic and talk about some studios and developers that we think are a little bit underappreciated in the industry. We got about half an hour left here of the show.
Sure.
So we've been talking about this for a little while, about how some studios just don't really get the recognition they deserve, or they make games that, for some of these studios, maybe their games are slightly janky or are limited by budget, right? That because they're limited by budgets, your average gamer isn't necessarily able to see the kind of shining ideas that are there, because
Hmm.
they see the jank and they see the limitation, and it's too off-putting for them, right? So I'm going to come to you first, Jeff, because I know you've got a couple of good studios there.
Hmm.
Which is one studio that you'd really shout out as kind of you would consider underappreciated?
Yeah. So my two options, one is a team that makes absolutely stellar games that doesn't get the recognition I think they deserve, as well as what they do apart from developing. And then another one is, again, that example you said, essentially where like a lot of their games are fueled by passion and not budget. So my favorite developer right now is Spiders. I absolutely love them. I'm so excited for Steel Rising because I love
So
what they
for
do.
people, so for people who don't know Spiders, do you want to tell people
Yeah,
some of the other games that they've made that they might be aware of?
you got it. So Spiders has been around since I think around 2010. They've made a variety of different games that people have likely seen. Everything from like Sherlock Holmes and Jack the Ripper to Testament of Sherlock Holmes, which are two of my favorite Sherlock Holmes, until like Frogwares and some other companies and stuff essentially have been making Sherlock Holmes games. Spiders also made Mars Warlogs on Xbox 360. There was also Bound by Flame, which was super fun. I loved Technomancer. I absolutely love that game. And their latest one hit pretty good. with the audience, and that was Greedfall. A lot of their games are kind of inspired by a lot of old school BioWare stuff, mostly like Dragon Age. And I know BioWare has an old school, but like when you take a look at something like Greedfall, it plays like a Dragon Age. So when they made like Technomancer and Greedfall, like the studio right now is around 70 plus people. It's very
Mhm.
small, and they have a lot of contractors. So you could see a game probably balloon up to 120 people or something. But you get games like Bound by Flame and Technomancer. They were made by about 20 to 40 people, and their budgets were like
And
three to
when you see what they've been able to achieve with that limitation of only 20 to 40 people,
yeah.
it's I think that's one thing, right? And I don't want to I'm not trying to take away from anybody and kind of disrespect anyone, but I think that sometimes gamers don't quite understand that a game made by only 20 people is going to be limited, even if those 20 people have a ridiculous amount of money, because there is only so much that 20 people can do, right? So when you see games like, and this isn't a Spiders game, but when you see games like Hellblade, the original Hellblade,
14.
and they were limited in terms of how many people worked on that game and what they were
There was
able to
14 people,
achieve.
including like the talent.
And what they were able to achieve with that many people making that game is astronomical.
Yeah.
And I think that Spiders, as you're saying, is one of those studios that they actually achieve above their weight, and that's something where that's what they deserve the credit for, because they're the
Mm.
kind of studio that I always look at and I think, I don't want to say this, but it's the one that comes to mind. I think to myself, what if they had Microsoft money? You know, what if they were one of the studios that Microsoft picked up and went, yeah, we're going to expand you because we like your ideas, but we want you to be able to execute on them with more polish and more time to be able to
Yeah,
really see out your visions.
like the majority of their games, I believe, I'd have to double check this, but I think they're mostly published by Focus Entertainment. I think Knock On is the team that are the publishing arm for Steel Rising.
Yes.
Um, just to flesh out what I have written here, so like Bound by Flame and Technomancer had roughly a budget of like 3 to 5 million. I couldn't find a budget for Greedfall. It seemed somewhere between 5 to 10.
Which is a
Um,
little bit bigger.
which is a little bit bigger. But then you take a look at something like Witcher 3, for example. It was
Yeah.
made by 150 to 250 employees at the time. It had a budget of around 80 million,
Yeah.
which is substantially bigger than that. Then you take a look at
And
something like
let's be clear, we're not saying that Greedfall is in the
no,
same league as Witcher
but in
3.
terms of
We're
how
just
much
trying to put
money
it into
essentially they're
perspective.
trying to
Yeah.
compete with, because
Yeah.
like Assassin's Creed Valhalla had 15 studios and over 1,000 people. Assassin's Creed Unity had pretty much 1,000 people,
Yeah.
and look what it launched in.
I know. I
So
know.
I mean, it's unbelievable what Spiders has been able to produce, and they're part of
And
a
their
category that is called
consistency,
Eurojank.
and also their consistency at a certain level of quality, right? Like, this is the thing. Okay, maybe a Spiders game isn't going to knock your socks off, and it's not going to be a game that you consider one of the best you've ever played,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to be a pretty good game, and they're not charging you 70 quid for this for this experience, like,
I think Steel Rising is even discounted too. I
yeah.
don't think it's a full price.
So they understand where their place is in the market as well. They're not trying to reach above their station in that regard. That, like you said, they are one of the studios that is just making games out of a passion for games, right? And they have these ideas that they want to execute on. And compared to other studios, they are limited in terms
Mm-hmm.
of their budget and scope which they can reach. But if you look at something like Greedfall, that really did connect with people. Like, I know people that played that game just because it was on Game Pass, thinking, oh, this is a Game Pass where kind of game, and then they loved it. Like, they would
Mm-hmm.
they would they would turn around and say, yeah, it's a bit janky, but there's something about it I really like, and that that is when you know that what's underneath the jank is a great game.
Yeah, and they're
And
making a sequel now too.
Yeah, precisely. And the problem for these kind of studios is the only way that you get rid of that kind of jank and that kind of slight stiffness is more money and more time to make a game. But the only way they get more money and more time to make a game is by having more people play their games in the first place, so that
Mm.
then when they want to make another game, they can spend more money on it. I almost guarantee you that Greedfall 2 will have a lot more money behind it because they know the first game was a success. So they have a built in audience and they can take a bit more of a risk financially with it. So
Yeah,
that's
and
really exciting to
it's
see.
their first official sequel,
Yeah.
although I'd have to double check, but I swear that Technomancer is a sequel to Mars Vlogs. I thought there was some connection, but in terms of putting a number on it,
Yeah. In terms of a direct
that
sequel, this is the
yeah.
first one, right?
And Steel
Um,
Rising is like their FromSoft love letter, as opposed to
for sure.
Greedfall being
For
their
sure.
Bioware love
I'm
letter.
I'm excited for Still Rising, and I hope to be able to review that game somewhere. So
Yeah, I've been reaching out as much as I possibly can. I'm like, dude, I'm like, just give me a code, please. I mean, I'll buy it
yeah,
if I
you're
don't. I mean,
I mean, like you said, they are your favorite studio
I'm a
right now,
Spiders fan
right?
for life, so
So yeah. And they, they've interacted with us a little bit on Twitter, so they know that we exist here at the G4A network, and hopefully they'll be kind to us because you, of course, Jeff, are now part of the G4A network. Um, and you are an official host now, so that's a little bit more weight for you. But let's talk about one of my studios then, because this is quite funny actually, because you have the opposite monolith to me on your list.
spoilers.
I went for Monolith Productions, who of course made the Mordor games recently,
Mm-hmm.
and they are making a Wonder Woman game right now, we know of. And to me, I think they are criminally underrated. And I think that, underappreciated because I think if you look at that first Mordor game, a lot of people played it a long time after it came out and they went, oh, this could have been a game of the year. Do you know what I mean? It was like people played it later and went, oh, this was actually amazing and it had this really unique system. And then Shadow of War was hurt by the publisher kind of pushing microtransactions into the game that the developer, from what I understand, didn't want to be there, and
Mm-hmm.
they changed it later on as
Paywalled the ending pretty much for that grind.
yeah. So it's like, so that kind of hurt the game in terms of the core game was great, but people's reaction to the game was so hurt by the microtransactions at the time, especially because it came at around the time where the conversation about microtransactions was so heavy and so it kind of felt like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? In terms of, yeah, this is one too far now because you're locking a secret ending essentially behind a paywall, or you're expecting people to really grind to get this secret ending. And it's like, they didn't need to do that because the game was great. Like people would have grinded for this ending anyway because the game was great. It's just that
Mm-hmm.
they made it so grindy that it was clear that they were trying to push you towards spending money, and they didn't need to do that because as far as I'm concerned, Shadow of War was actually a better game than the first game. Overall, I think it
Mm-hmm.
was a better game.
Well,
Um,
improved upon like the Nemesis stuff, and like the Nemesis stuff wasn't even in the 360 version.
no, it
I
wasn't.
think it was only in the Xbox One and
Yeah.
PS4
Yeah,
as
of
well too.
course.
But
Yeah. So it's like, to me, I think, and they've made some other games in the past as well that
yeah, some that
people
are
kind of,
like still considered really really good, like Condemned Criminal, like the second
mhm,
one,
yeah.
Fear 2.
Fear. Yeah. Fear
Um,
is the one I was going to shout out. Like, people really did like Fear. It's just, but for some reason, they always feel like WB's forgotten studio. Like, a lot of people forget that they exist. And I
mhm.
don't know whether it's because there's another monolith out there that do other. Do you know what I mean? So I think there's maybe a little bit of confusion between those two. Um, but yeah, for me, Monolith Productions, like they're the one studio where I just think to myself, okay, every time they bring out a game, it's probably going to be great. Like that's how I feel at this time. Is
And I
like
don't think they're a recognizable name. I think that if you were to ask anybody who made the Shadow Mordor games and then Fear and like Criminal
no
Origins,
one would know, right? No one would
no
know.
one would know. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, Criminal Origins, Sega. Sega made that." Well, they published it, right?
and it's and but that comes back to my exact point. Is like they are basically an unknown studio, which means they must be underappreciated because they certainly deserve to at least be known. They certainly
Yeah.
deserve to be, you know, when you say their name, people should go, "Oh yeah, they made the Mordor games. They were cool," or or whatever. It's
Hmm.
excuse me. They to me, they just yeah, I don't know. They at the end of the day, a lot of it for me comes from the Mordor games, where they
Hmm.
invented this system, the Nemesis system, that we've never seen before in gaming. And it was really cool, right? It was really, really cool.
Trying to remember if Warner Brothers actually ended up following through on that patent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they did, but my point is it means that they are an original studio in terms of they're not just going out there trying to copy other games.
Hmm.
I think that some people saw Shadow of Mordor, the first game, and we're kind of like, oh, it's basically Assassin's Creed, but in a Lord of the Rings coat of paint, and it's like, no, it was so much more than that. It
Yeah,
was
it was
so
Sexy
much
Sheila.
more than that. It was so it's just like, yeah, I would like, I think that they're one of the studios that deserves a little bit more recognition for what they do. And I think that, yeah, we haven't seen Wonder Woman yet, but
Do you
after the, go on,
do you think the Wonder Woman game is going to have the Nemesis system,
I think,
or
go
are
on.
they not going to have it so that they can have an identity away from just that system?
So this is what I was going to say is I don't know if they'll have that system. I wonder something I would like to see them play on with it because in Shadow of War, you got your allies within that system as well, right? So they introduced the ally element to it, and I
Hmm.
wonder with Wonder Woman whether what they could do is almost do like an ally system where they're using the Nemesis system, but maybe you have to build up relationships with different heroes in the game
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. Um, because we don't know what they're going to do, right? We don't know what they're going to do with Wonder Woman. But I think, as you said, there is a concern of, okay, yeah, they could lean into this system again because this system is great, but then do they become the developer that is known more for the system than the great games they make around it?
It's like Rocksteady. The problem that they have coming up with Suicide Squad is like, are they going to be able to be something more than just the Batman studio?
Precisely. So it's an identity thing for sure. Um, but the reason I brought up Wonder Woman is I know we haven't seen it yet, but I think that people should be excited for it because I think that if you have played those Mordor games, you can see that they handle what is essentially superpowers very, very well. They do you know what I mean? Like they give you superpowers in those games and they handle them expertly in terms of
Hmm.
gameplay. So we know they can do the gameplay stuff in terms of superpowers.
Oh,
And
I
then
can
it's
just imagine them making a Nemesis game based out of the boys.
oh my god.
That would be
So yeah, for me,
amazing.
they were the first studio that came to mind of, like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Jeff, of people literally don't even know who they are. And it
Hmm.
doesn't become much more underappreciated than that, right? In terms of, like you said, how many of these games would you say? And people go, oh, yeah, who made that game? And people would, with the Mordor games, people would probably say, oh, Warner Brothers made those games. And it's like, yeah, they did. But which actual developer made those games. Um, so yeah, I think they are criminally underrated and underappreciated, and hopefully their future Wonder Woman game can be their kind of breakout moment
Mm-hmm.
where people do then, because Wonder Woman's the kind of game where people will play just because it's Wonder Woman, right? And it puts a lot more eyes on them in term. I know that, yeah, okay, Lord of the Rings, whatever, but I actually spoke to some people who didn't even realize the Shadow games were connected to Lord of the Rings. Like they just thought they were weirdly. I don't know why, but I've spoken to a few people who at the time didn't realize, and I know that, you know, people came to those games late as well, and I think it was, I don't know, Lord of the Rings is a little bit of a strange IP when it comes to games because I think they don't always translate well. And I
Yeah,
think that
their highs are
people,
really high, but their lows are really low.
yeah, and I think that people were kind of very apprehensive around the Mordor games because of that,
Yeah.
where it's just like, oh, we don't know. And then obviously people discovered them later, and then there was the controversy around the second game with the microtransactions. I think they just had a lot that they were kind of fighting against with that
Mm-hmm.
IP, right? And Wonder Woman hopefully is a fresh start for them, where they are able to show your more casual gamer, yeah, this is what we can do. And this is the, and even if they do use the Nemesis system, they can be like, yeah, this is the cool system we had
Yeah, as long as they
that
like
everyone who
develop
played
it.
yeah, that's the thing. They have to develop the system, and hopefully they will, because I can't remember, but I feel like Shadow of War was about 4 years ago. I think that game came out.
Something like
So
that.
they've had, yeah, obviously they've had COVID to contend with, but they have had a long period of time in
We
which to
might see
kind
it
of,
at the Warner Fandom
for
this year,
sure,
maybe.
for sure, but they've had a long period of time in terms of what to do, whether they,
Yeah.
because they may not have even worked on Wonder Woman straight away. They may have been working on something else. We don't know. Um, but yeah, no, I just think that, I hope that people give them a little bit more appreciation in the future, because they are a solid studio that you can count on to make a
Yeah.
very good game.
They're
Um,
another studio that, and like along the same line, actually,
mm,
before I get on to my last one, is they're in the exact same position, I think, as Avalanche, because there's two Avalanche studios.
yeah,
There's one that makes like Just Cause, Mad Max, and then there's the other one that makes that Harry
and
Potter
in a way,
game that's coming out.
both of those studios have a similar problem, right?
Exactly. Like they have similar names. You couldn't like if you said, "Hey, who makes the Just Cause games?" Square Enix.
Yeah, yeah,
They're not like when you say who makes the Batman games, Rocksteady. You don't
yeah.
go Warner.
No,
So like
precisely.
they're in the exact same places as that monolith.
For sure, for sure. And those are two underappreciated studios as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some stage in the future, because
Mm.
they both have projects that they are working on, obviously. Um, but you, of course, have Monolith Soft on your list.
Yeah, like the thing with Monolith is like I the first game of theirs I played um, that I can remember in regards to they were the lead developer was probably Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which I absolutely love. I love that game so much. I have some issues with it for sure, but I absolutely love it. And then I went back and played, the Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and whatnot. And like I had played, I think way long ago when they did like Xenogears and all that stuff. But in terms of like, I beat it Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So I'm super excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 this month. And everywhere I see is people like every podcast, every single one of them, they're like, oh, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 comes to this mod. Is anybody here interested in it? No, no. Okay, we'll move on to the next thing.
A
Like, oh,
lot
let's
of
talk about Overwatch.
people aren't, right. They don't even talk about it.
Yeah.
I
And
I look at Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and because I played a bit of 2, but it didn't quite grab me. But I did
yeah,
see there things that I liked. Do you know what I mean? I saw things that I really liked. So for me, 3 isn't. a definite purchase. I'm going to wait and see what the kind of reaction is to it. But it's definitely one that I've got my eye on because I can.
Yeah, I managed to snipe the collectors. That
I know
was
you.
such a
I know you were
debacle.
waiting for that. Yeah, I know you were waiting for that one, and it's just like. But I know exactly what you mean. Again, with this studio, is like if I said to someone who makes Xenoblade Chronicles, unless they played those games, they wouldn't
It's a
know,
diehard
right?
fan answer for sure.
Um, and it's one of those things where, like you mentioned earlier, that's not the same as the Batman games. If you said to someone who makes the Batman games, even if they hadn't played those games, they would probably stay rock steady because they've probably heard from their friend. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things where certain studios just have this wider reach in terms of recognition. And the more recognizable a studio you are, and the more that you can kind of stand out, the more appreciation you get for things, I think, just by the way that, the way that
Yeah,
human beings are, they just tend to gravitate towards things that stand out.
like the reason why I kind of have them on this list is like from Xenogears to Xenoblade as lead teams.
Mhm.
They're building some of like the biggest worlds on Switch right now,
Yeah.
by far. And
What
with
they're able to achieve on that hardware is ridiculous, right?
yeah, and especially with like how detailed everything is. But they're also, and this is what a lot of people don't know, they were also support developers on some of Nintendo's biggest franchises. Everything from Smash Brothers to Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild
Yeah, they
would
do a
not
lot
be
of
what it
work, right?
is
Yeah,
without
they do a
Monolith
lot
Soft.
of
And
work.
even Splatoon, Pikmin 3, like Assassin's Creed New Horizons, as Animal Crossing New Horizons. Can you imagine that though? Ezio just living on an island, owing like a raccoon money. It's like, I'm not paying you. Stab. But
Brilliant.
Animal Crossing New Horizons, they were
Mm,
a support team on that. Like they are, their footprint in Nintendo is massive
yeah.
and like monolithic, even to pun it. But
Mm.
they are a phenomenal team, and
They're
like
they're one of those studios, like you're saying, they're one of those studios that does a lot more than people will ever realize, right? Unless you really take the time to kind of look into them and figure out what they do actually have their hands in and what they do outside of their own games,
mhm.
you don't quite understand their influence. But it's one of those things where I think it does go back to Xenoblade Chronicles, and you look at what they've achieved there, and it's like people are looking at the Pokemon games recently, and it's like these games don't look good on Switch, and then some people are like, oh, but that's because Switch is old hardware now, whatever. And it's like, but then you look at
And then you look
Xenoblade
at,
Chronicles,
and they're probably stretched thin because they're probably helping on Breath of the Wild 2 right now. So they, again, like Pokemon's made by like the Pokemon Company and Game
Mm,
Freak. Like Nintendo is, I think, hands reach, like within hands reach on a lot of stuff. But I mean, yeah, like that team is just producing some of the best looking stuff on the Switch, and I think will continue to.
absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. So yeah, I do have one more studio that I wanted to bring up here before we kind of end the show, and that is a studio that it's kind of cheap because I think that they will begin to get more recognition now, but I think for a long time they haven't got recognition, and that is Housemark, who of
Hmm.
course made Returnal. And Returnal hopefully has kind of been their breakout game where people now will pay attention to them. But if you look at their history, they were about as indie a studio as you could get, right? They were about
Yeah, you
as
look at their previous game, and then you go to Return, and you're like, what the hell happened here?
yeah,
Like that's a glow
precisely.
up.
And but that's exactly what I mean about how if you look at what they've done previously and then you look at what they achieved with Returnal, how can you not appreciate the quality of what they're able to do? Because how many other, no disrespect to any studios out there, but
Mhm.
going bigger and growing and aiming and kind of changing your scope on things is a very hard thing to do, and it's a thing that takes time, right? We see studios expand and they don't always knock it out of the park the first time that they make a
Especially
game.
when they change their core identity. I mean, look
Yeah,
at Gorilla and look at Sucker Punch. They went from creating like platformy games to
Mm,
like, gray shooters to vibrant graphical
absolutely.
fidelity powerhouses in Horizon Zero Dawn
Yeah.
to Ghosts of Tsushima. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's
Uh,
unbelievable.
and it's like, and I think that Housemarque is another one of those, right? Like we've seen, obviously, Sony now own them, and they are a proper first-party studio.
Yeah.
But go back to the launch of the PS4, and what was one of the games that everybody was talking about? Do you remember, Jeff? Do you remember?
PS4.
Yeah. Which what
Oh.
was the game? What was the game around launch time that everybody was talking about?
Well, I mean, I know a lot of people were talking about like Order 1886 because of how short it was.
Of course, but they were also talking about Resogun, right?
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah,
everyone was playing Resogun,
yeah.
and this is my point. That was a Housemarque game, and it was one of the best launch games on the PS4, right? And then they go from that to a generation later, and if you haven't played Resogun, please go and look and see what it is,
Hmm.
because to go from that to a generation later making a game like Returnal, which is basically a AAA game, um,
Yeah,
is
it has that look.
astronomical, right? It's
Yeah.
astronomical. And what I love about it is they've been able to take that step up without really losing their identity. Like you
Hmm.
still know that it's a Housemarque game because it's still got that bullet hell kind of very indie aspect to it, right? Like
Yeah.
it almost feels like an indie game made with a AAA budget. Is the way that I would describe it. Um
Yeah, it's fun. I never beat
and
it or anything, but
no, I never beat it either, but my point is they're one of those studios that every single game they make, regardless of genre or scope, has been a solid game. They haven't had a miss, right? They haven't missed once in their history, really, from at least what I've played of their
well, it's
games.
a bullet hell. You're supposed to.
and and it's just like to be able to do that while growing and changing scope and aiming for different things is crazy. It's absolutely crazy, and it really should be appreciated because I think that longer term, over the next 5 to 10 years, we could see Housemarque be one of Sony's and one of PlayStation's most celebrated studios. When they make another couple of games at the kind of Returnal scope that they are now looking at,
Hmm.
it's like we could see them be one of the studios where people start to highly anticipate their games. Do you know what I mean? I feel like maybe not as many people played Returnal as they would have liked, but hopefully with the revamped PlayStation Plus, if people are upgrading their subscriptions, they'll be able to access it through that and try it out because it's definitely worth trying out. Like there's a
Yeah,
good
I
game there.
enjoyed what I played of it. It's just the skill ceiling for the time that I wanted to put into it just
Absolutely.
clashed.
And there is
Um,
and there is of course co-op now. So there's it's even you have more to experience in that game now. If you haven't played it yet, you can play it in co-op. But they are
mhm.
one of the studios that I'd really advise people kind of keep their eye on because you may not know them. And to you, Returnal may have been their first game. You may not have even heard of them before, right? But I
Yeah,
guarantee you will hear of them again. Like it's they are one of those studios, like I said, that hasn't missed yet. They just maybe haven't made a game that you've been looking for in terms of genre or scope or whatever, because some people don't like to play these smaller indie games, which is really weird to me. Um, but
tripwire bust.
but yeah, like note them down on your little notepad and remember that name, Housemarque, because they are going to be a very special studio as far as I'm concerned in
Yeah,
in the
there's a
future.
lot of studios that have done a remarkable job in reinventing themselves and being like that first experience for a lot of stuff, especially like again Guerrilla. Like if you were to play Horizon Zero Dawn for the first time and that was your first experience to Guerrilla,
That's
and
just made
then
me think. That's just made me think. There's one other studio that I want to shout out because I'm surprised that they're able to do what they do, and that is a Sobo studio. Because
they
I,
made
I
the little robot guy on PlayStation, right? The
no 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 no
no
no
no no yeah, Plague Tale.
yeah.
I'm thinking of
You're thinking
the
of
guys that made
Asobi, right? You're thinking of
yeah
Asobi, Team
these
Asobi.
names, like all these names are just the exact same thing.
So Asobo Studio made Plague Tale. They obviously have Plague Tale Requiem coming out in October.
Mm-hmm.
But also people may not realize they made, if I'm not mistaken, Flight Sim. And if I'm not mistaken, they also
That
made Flight
sounds
Sim.
right.
And if you look at Flight Sim compared to Plague Tale, like they've made a technical powerhouse, probably one of the most technically impressive video games we've ever seen in Flight Sim. And then they make double A story driven, kind of really focused games that are a little bit more limited, and they're clearly able to do both things. You know, they've done the big budget project with Flight Sim and having the whole world in the game and all that kind of stuff using cloud technology, and they've done something very, very different. And I, again, similar to Housemark, I think they are a studio that is worth keeping an eye on, because if they continue on the trajectory that they're on, especially with Plague Tale Requiem, it's going to be interesting to
It is
see.
that team.
Nice, nice. It's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of build on what they've done before, and if they can kind of keep up this upward trajectory, because again, they are a really, really solid studio that clearly has their hands in a lot of things. And if I'm not mistaken, at one time, they were a little bit like Monolith Soft, where they were basically supporting a lot of other teams to make their games. They've been a lot
Yeah.
of
They got like they made a couple Disney games and like Ratatouille. Maybe that's where they got that like drive. We need to make a rat game. Then you got Wally, Toy Story 3. But here's one that now like the flight sim thing
Mm,
kind of feels out of place, right? With
it
them
does.
that.
It does.
But this is going to bring it all together. What did they make before A Plague Tale Innocence?
I can't remember. What did they make?
The Crew 2.
Oh wow, okay, so they worked on the Crew too. Okay. Oh wow.
Yeah, so that's and they made the Crew. They made the first one as well too. So like that is a very robust studio in
So they
regards
were,
to
but this is exactly
doing
what
that
I
kind of
mean
stuff.
about with them. They're not always the lead studio, but they do work on a lot of things, and
Yeah.
they over the last few years they've clearly found a place for them to be the lead studio through Plague Tale and Flight Sim. Like the fact that Microsoft went to them for Flight Sim, that tells you
It's
something,
probably because
right?
of the streaming stuff that they did for the Crew, because you could drive across the country. But and
Absolutely. So it's, they are a studio that's really worth watching out for, because we saw what Plague Tale Innocence did. Plague Tale Requiem looks like it's going to be a good step up from that, and hopefully it will
mm-hmm,
be. Um, and then who knows what they're going to do after that? Like obviously they're still adding stuff to Flight
the
Sim and,
Crew
and
3.
supporting that game. Maybe you know.
Like that's and again too, like you get a lot of these companies and a lot of these studios that become these support studios,
Mm,
and everyone like oh yeah, it's a support studio. I guarantee you every single game you ever played and have loved to death has
yeah,
had a support studio. Like you take a look even
absolutely.
like
Every
Naughty
game has a
Dog
support
or
studio. Yeah,
Sony
yeah.
Santa Monica, every single one of them, like Assassin's
And
Creed
and the other
Valhalla, 15 studios.
and the other thing is, some of these support studios are more than capable of making their own games as the lead studio. Some of
Yeah.
these studios we've brought up to you today are those kind of studios where they will support another team and they'll do great work doing that, but they're also capable of making their own stuff.
Hmm.
And, you know, just there are so many, like there are too many underappreciated studios that we couldn't go through them all here because there are
Yeah.
loads. There are
Oh yeah.
loads and loads and loads. And just look at as a somewhat controversial company, I want people to look at Activision and understand how many studios within Activision are underappreciated because they've been rolled into basically the Call of Duty machine, but these
Or
are
World of
top
Warcraft. I mean, we
quality.
lost the guys that made that. So what is it? Spell.
Oh, Spellbreaker or something like that. Is it
Yeah, like
Spellbreaker?
I played it and I really enjoyed it. I just didn't have anybody that
But
I knew
but
that was playing it.
but this is exactly what I mean. Is there so like I think of the guys, and I forget their name right now, so please forgive me. But the guys who made Tony Hawk's 1+2, the kind of remakes, remasters of those games,
Vicarious Visions.
yeah, and they absolutely nailed that to the point where they deserved to make their own Tony Hawk game after that. Like they did it that well, right?
Hmm.
And what happened? They got rolled in to support on other things instead. And
Well,
it's
maybe
like,
Papa Phil next year will be like, "Hey guys,
well, let's see on that, But with all that being said, please let us know in the comments, either on YouTube or hit us up on Twitter. You can find Jeff at Necromancer. We'll link it below,
yeah, that's
and
my
we'll
personal one."
and also Analog Stick Gaming is on Twitter as well. We'll link that below. Obviously, ours is at G4A Network and also at Eat Sleep Game. And let us know. Let us know what you think are some of the most underappreciated or undervalued studios, because there are so many out there. Like we were having this conversation previously and we were struggling to think, but then as you start talking about some of these studios, you realize how many there are out there that are kind of like unsung heroes, right? Like they do so much work for other teams and they do so much in so many different places that we don't necessarily realize their impacts. And then when they make games by themselves, nobody knows who they are, even though they still do a great job, right?
Hmm.
So it's a hard one. So yeah, let us know what are some of the studios that you think are undervalued and underappreciated. And Jeff will be back probably in 2 weeks' time. I don't know what we'll be talking about yet, but we'll have a discussion about that. And then next week on the show, I will be joined by another host to talk about Nintendo's best games of all time. So look out for that episode. And yeah, we will see you next time. Goodbye.